Ms. Archuleta, there was a data breach at OPM in July of 2014, okay? This is what you said about your Ms. Seymour. In December, I was very fortunate to bring Donna Seymour from the Department of Defense on board. She has great experience with IT world and brought her talents to OPM. It was because of her leadership and her dedicated employees that we were able to make sure that none of this personal identifiable information was compromised. This was July of 2014. You cited her with the data breach as making sure that none of the personal identifiable information got out the door. Now that it has been hacked, are you going to give her that same amount of credit?
I do give her that same amount of credit. Sir, when I began my tenure as the director of OPM, one of my first priorities was to develop an IT strategic plan and to develop the important pillar of cybersecurity within our systems. We have worked very hard since that time, and as we update these legacy systems, it's important that we recognize that there is a persistent and aggressive effort on the part of these actors to not only intrude in our system, but systems throughout government and indeed in the private sector.
Well, you have completely and utterly failed in that mission if that was your objective. The Inspector General has been warning about this since 2007. There have been breach after breach. He recommended shutting it down last year, and you made a conscious decision to not do that. You kept it open, the information was vulnerable, and the hackers got it. I don't know if it's the Chinese, the Russians, or wherever else, but they've got it. And they're going to prey upon the American people. That's their goal and objective. And you made a conscious decision to leave that information vulnerable.
We've held hearings where it showed that federal agencies couldn't procure, implement, or deploy IT systems without massive bugs or massive cost overruns. We've held hearings where at least one federal agency, in this case the FBI, had a fundamental misunderstanding of technology where they continue to believe they can put in backdoors to encryption systems just for the good guys and not for hackers, which you cannot do. We had over 10 federal data system breaches last year. So there is a culture problem, and there is a problem of civilian leadership not understanding we're in a cyber war. Every day we're getting attacked in both the public and private sector. The U.S. military understands this. That's why they stood up an entire U.S. cyber command. But until our civilian leadership understands the gravity of this issue, we're going to continue having more data breaches. So let me give you some examples of this culture problem. You've heard today there was unencrypted Social Security numbers. That's just not acceptable. That is a failure of leadership. Look at the various IG reports over the years showing material weaknesses, and then look at last year's IG report, page 12. It says, as of November of last year, OPM had not yet done a risk assessment. That is ridiculous, especially since you knew in March your system was breached. That is a failure of leadership. And this goes beyond just OPM. Now, Mrs. Scott, you've only been here a few months, so you're going to get a pass on this. But I want to know, why was it that it wasn't until last Friday that agencies were ordered to put in basic cybersecurity measures? Why wasn't this done last year? Why wasn't this done years before? There was a failure of leadership above that of OPM. And when there is a culture problem, what have we done in the past? Well, especially in the area of national security, you can't have the view that, oh, this is legacy system, oh, we have these excuses. In national security, it's got to be zero tolerance. That's got to be your attitude. We can't have these breaches. The CIA can't go around saying, you know, every now and then our database of spies is going to get breached. That cannot happen. And when you have a culture problem, as we have had here, in the past when agencies have had this, leadership resigns or they're fired. At the DEA, leadership left. We had this happen at the Secret Service. We had this happen to Veterans Administration. And we as a government do that for two reasons. One is to send a signal that the status quo is not acceptable. We cannot continue to have this attitude where we make excuse after excuse. And you know, I've heard a lot of testimony today. The one word I haven't heard is the word sorry. When is OPM going to apologize to over 4 million federal employees that just had their personal data compromised? When is OPM going to apologize to the federal employees that had personally devastating information released through the SF-86 forms? I haven't heard that yet. And when there is a culture problem, we send a signal to others that the status quo is unacceptable and leadership has to resign.